If you're watching this alone, you might want to leave the lights on. What you're about to hear is not just another ghost story. It's a true creepy story that blurs the line between memory and nightmare. This chilling tale begins in a quiet town in Ashfield, Massachusetts, where a boy named Ethan was spending summer with his grandmother. One lazy afternoon, while exploring the dusty attic, he stumbled upon an old photo tucked inside a broken music box. It looked like a regular vintage photo at first, until the shadows shifted, and what was captured on it became horrifyingly clear. The child in the picture looked exactly like Ethan. Same hair, same posture, even the same turtleneck sweater he was wearing that very day. But the most disturbing detail, the eyes had been violently blacked out, scribbled with heavy ink strokes. And the smile, not innocent, not sweet, a crooked, sinister smirk that hinted at something watching, waiting, and enjoying it. Was it a picture of a long-lost relative, or was it a glimpse into something that once lived in the attic, and maybe still does? The attic photo. Ethan didn't know why he brought the photo down from the attic. It felt like something had nudged him, some invisible force pulling at his thoughts, at his hands. He placed the old frame on the kitchen table. Under the dim yellow light, the twisted smile on the child's face looked even more sinister. But what truly unsettled Ethan wasn't the smile, it was the feeling that something in the house had shifted, as if the moment he touched the photo, a door had opened somewhere, quietly, invisibly. "Grandma, who's the kid in this photo?" Ethan asked. His grandmother froze. Her eyes clouded over, and for a moment she seemed like someone else. Then her voice came out as a sharp whisper. "Put that thing back, now! Don't ever touch it again!" Her tone wasn't scolding, it was terrified. And in that terror, Ethan felt something darker than fear. He sensed a long, buried truth clawing its way back to the surface like a corpse rising from a frozen lake. Wilderness stories that were never meant to be found. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He grabbed his phone flashlight and crept back up to the attic, ignoring the voice in his head screaming, "Don't be that kid from those scary horror stories." The old attic, once just dusty and dull, now felt alive. The air buzzed like whispers humming through the wood. At the far end, behind a warped plank, he spotted a small wooden box secured with a rusted latch. Heart pounding, he pried it open with a metal rod. Inside was a stack of aged papers and a leather-bound notebook. The first line inside made his blood run cold. Field notes. William Blackwood, Park Ranger, Emerson National Park. Missing since 1982. True creepy stories buried in time. William Blackwood. No one in his family had ever mentioned the name, but the last name Blackwood matched Ethan's own. He flipped through the notebook. The ink was smeared in places, the handwriting frantic. The boy showed up in June. I thought he was lost, until I realized he had no shadow. I asked his name. He just stared at me. That smile that looked stitched onto his face. The eyes were blacked out like someone took a marker to his soul. I tried to leave the ranger post, but the forest twisted itself. My compass spun. Every path led back to the same goddamn clearing. Each line tightened the knot in Ethan's chest. William had seen the boy, the same boy from the photo, the one who looked just like Ethan. I took a photo of him, but every time I developed it, he showed up somewhere else in the frame behind me, beside me, staring from inside the mirror. I'm losing my grip. The laughter in the trees, footsteps circling my tent at night. Creepy park ranger stories no one believed. Among the pages, Ethan found a sketch drawn hastily in charcoal. It was the ranger station, and next to it, cabin number 7. Underneath, scrawled in desperation, I tried to burn it all. I did, but when I returned, the cabin was gone. Only a photo remained, half burned. My own face in the photo, but the eyes had been blacked out. That's when Ethan's phone died. The screen went black. The attic fell silent, too silent. And then he heard it. Soft footsteps behind him. "Grandma," he whispered. No response. Just one soft creak closer. True scary stories you should never read alone. The next morning, Ethan sat at the breakfast table, the notebook clutched tight in his hands. His grandmother saw it and slapped the table so hard, the salt shaker toppled over. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. "William was your grandfather's brother. He didn't vanish. He never left that park. I went there once long ago. I saw the boy too." Ethan's spoon clattered into his bowl. "Let's not meet, but it might be too late." That night, Ethan dreamed of the forest, but not any forest. This one was wrong. Endless, rotting. It was a wilderness with no edge and no sky. He stood in a ring of stones holding the photograph. In the dark, something emerged, a child, his face identical to Ethan's, but the eyes were black sockets. It smiled and said, "Give it back." Ethan screamed, woke up. The photo was gone from the table. Scary woods stories that feel too real, the days blurred. He began to hear laughter, not human laughter, but shrill, broken. He'd find dirt in his shoes after waking pine needles in his bed. One morning he saw a reflection in the hallway mirror, just a flash. His own reflection was smiling, but he wasn't. The descent, J-curve, cracking sanity. Ethan started documenting everything, just like William did. He posted on Reddit, "Has anyone ever heard of Emerson National Park or Cabin Number 7? Something's wrong with my family's past." People replied. Some shared creepy stories, tales of cursed cabins, distorted maps, park ranger stories, where rangers went missing or found their own corpses rotting for weeks, but were still breathing. One DM stood out. "Don't go to cabin number 7. I did. I saw myself die there. I never left." Ethan stopped sleeping. Open loop continues. He made a decision. He needed answers. He needed to go to Emerson National Park, where William vanished, where the notebook was written, where that boy might be waiting. The journey begins into the wilderness. Ethan packed lightly a flashlight, the notebook, a Polaroid camera, and a printed map of Emerson National Park. He didn't tell his grandmother. He couldn't. She would have begged him not to go, or worse, tried to stop him. The plan was simple: find cabin number 7, compare it with the journal, take pictures, and finally prove he wasn't losing his mind. As he drove up the winding road toward the park's ranger entrance, the trees began to thicken the air, colder than it had been just a mile ago. His phone lost signal. The GPS froze. Just like in those creepy park ranger stories he once dismissed as Reddit fiction. But now every roadside sign, every creaking branch whispered the same thing: turn back, arrival at Emerson, the national park with no welcome. The park was eerily empty. No rangers, no tourists. Only one truck in the lot, rusted and half sunk in the mud. An old wooden sign swayed in the breeze, the word cabin, barely legible through peeling paint. He followed the path marked North Trailhead. According to William's notebook, cabin number 7 sat 3 miles into the trees near a clearing by Stillwater Lake. At first, the path was clear, but an hour in it changed. The trees pressed closer, the ground grew damp, and then the compass needle spun in circles. Ethan stopped. This was exactly what the notebook said. Creepy outdoor stories come to life. As fog began to roll across the trail, Ethan heard what he thought was laughter, high-pitched, distant, but unmistakably human. "Hello," he called out. No answer, just the same laugh, this time to his left, then his right, then behind him. His steps grew faster. Every shadow now seemed to lean toward him. Every branch felt like a hand reaching. Every tree trunk a face turned away just in time. Ethan remembered reading stories like this on Let's Not Meet. People who encountered something in the woods, something that shouldn't have existed, something ancient, twisted. Cabin number 7, a place that shouldn't be there. And then just as suddenly as it all began, it stopped. He stepped into a clearing. Stillwater Lake lay perfectly still, not a ripple, not a breeze. At its edge, partially hidden by pine needles and thyme, stood cabin number 7. It looked exactly like in the sketch. Same crooked roof, same rotted steps, same heavy silence. Ethan approached carefully. Each footstep sounded too loud, like shouting in a church. The door was open. Of course it was. Inside the cabin, the loop begins again. Cobwebs veiled the doorway. Inside, everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, as if time itself refused to move here. He found the ranger journal on the table, identical to the one he had. Only this one was newer, fresher, and the last page had writing in it, written in red ink. "You came back." A sudden flash, his camera went off. He hadn't touched it, but the photo printed instantly. He looked at it, his hands shook, the cabin's interior. And standing behind him, staring directly into the lens, was the boy. Same face, same hair, same blacked out eyes, same crooked smile. True horror stories unfold in real time. Ethan turned around, no one. He ran outside, no wind, no sound. But in the reflection of the still lake, the boy stood at the cabin doorway. He turned. Gone, William's truth, the final pages. Back inside, he found a hidden compartment under the floorboards. A second notebook. This one was frantic pages, ripped, stained. The boy is not real, not human. It mimics, it waits, it wants to be seen. You don't find the cabin, it finds you. Each time it's seen, it grows stronger. The photo traps you. That's why it always smiles. I tried to warn them. They thought I went mad. Maybe I did. But they'll see it too. If you're reading this, it's already behind you. Let's read this carefully. Ethan dropped the notebook, ran. Through the trees, through the silence that felt too thick, like swimming through fog. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew. One thing. He had to get rid of the photo. He pulled it out of his jacket, only to realize it had changed. The boy wasn't alone anymore. Ethan was now in the photo. The descent continues. Madness creeps in. Back at his car, if it was even the same car, he drove in silence. But the forest never ended. The dirt road looped over and over. The gas meter didn't move. The sun never set, never rose. He was inside the story now, one of those true creepy stories people read online and assumed were fake. Somewhere between reality and nightmare. Somewhere between photo and mirror. Somewhere outside time. Final entry for now. We found a journal in Emerson Park, left on the ranger's station porch. No one knows who brought it. It ends like this. If you see a photo of a boy with no eyes and a twisted smile, don't look, don't touch, burn it before it smiles at you too. But no one listened. The photo is missing, and yesterday, a ranger saw a boy in the trees, wearing a turtleneck sweater, smiling. Ethan couldn't escape. No matter how far he walked, the forest folded in on itself, leading him back to cabin number 7, again and again. There were no animals, no wind, just soft whispers drifting from the trees, hundreds of voices repeating a single word: stay. This wasn't a forest anymore, it was a distorted space where time and logic unraveled, a place of wilderness stories no one lives to retell. He returned to the cabin. The old photograph still sat on the table, but now it had 3 people: the child with no eyes, William the missing ranger, and Ethan, all staring out at the viewer, waiting for a reaction. "I don't belong here," Ethan screamed. The only answer was laughter echoing from the shadows, the same chilling sound from those creepy park ranger stories and true scary stories he once found on Reddit. Repetition begins, the trap of time. The next morning, Ethan woke up on the cabin floor. Sunlight poured through the window. Everything looked normal, like yesterday. Exactly like yesterday. The mud on his shoes, the journal left open, the photograph. Except this time, Ethan was smiling in the photo. The loop deepens. Every time he woke, the day reset. But in the photo, Ethan changed. The smile grew wider. His eyes began to fade. He was becoming the boy in the picture. He was becoming the story. The cabin doesn't exist. On the fifth day, Ethan discovered another journal hidden behind a loose wallboard. Cabin number 7 isn't listed in any official national park stories. It's just one of those creepy outdoors stories rangers whisper around the fire to spook rookies. But I found it, and now I can't leave. Signed, William Blackwood. From reader to story. Ethan remembered all those nights scrolling Let's Read, binging stories from Reddit, laughing at true creepy stories he thought were just internet fiction. But now, he wasn't reading anymore. He was becoming the story, a scary horror story told on a stormy night when someone presses play and thinks, this is probably fake. Ethan's mind fractures. Time is a lie. Day 7. Or was it day 10? He couldn't tell anymore. Ethan began hearing faint voices in the moments before sleep, childlike, distorted like broken tape. Ethan, come back. We're still waiting. He stopped sleeping. He stopped looking in mirrors. He stopped trying to destroy the photo, because it always came back no matter how many times he burned it, buried it, tore it apart. And each time it returned, something new was added. He was disappearing from the image. The child's smile, it grew wider, deeper, until it nearly swallowed its face. Wilderness and the unspoken truth. Ethan started writing in a journal. He didn't know who would find it. But if someone stumbled across his words buried in a forgotten creepy story, or posted it as a warning on the Let's Not Meet maybe they'd do what he didn't. Don't touch the photo. Don't meet its eyes. And for God's sake, don't go to cabin number 7. What Ethan endured could be one of the scariest horror stories ever told, passed down through creepy outdoors stories, or whispered through true scary stories on Reddit. But it wasn't fiction. It didn't need exaggeration. The truth was terrifying enough. The photo was changing. One night, Ethan dared to look at the photo again, perhaps the 100th time, and he noticed something new. The figures were no longer still. They had moved. Every time he looked away, they got closer to the lens. He understood then, if they step out of the frame, they won't stay in their world anymore. The knock behind the picture. Then came a knock, not on the door, from behind the photograph. The cabin wall began to vibrate as though something behind it was clawing to be free. He remembered William's words, when the photo can no longer hold it, it will come through, and it won't come alone. Days that no longer count. Ethan stopped keeping track of time. In the cabin, the concept of days had lost all meaning. There was no nightfall, no sunrise, only a strange, stale daylight that never shifted. In William's old notebook, one line kept repeating in Ethan's mind, I might already be dead. But my body still breathes, still hungers, still fears. But the hunger wasn't physical. It was a hunger for presence, for recognition, like some unknown force deep within the wilderness was feeding off Ethan's very existence. The photograph that never stopped changing. The photo on the table, always the same photo, kept evolving. At first, it was subtle shadows, deepening trees, warping in the background. Then a bloody handprint appeared on the glass. One day, Ethan realized he was no longer visible in the picture. His place had been replaced by a warped, childlike figure with a crooked grin stretching ear to ear. The photo doesn't capture, it devours. He remembered countless creepy stories read on Reddit or played late at night via Let's Read videos. This felt like one of them, but it wasn't. This was a true horror story, one no reader could forget. The creepy outdoors stories that were never fiction desperate. Ethan tried to escape. He ventured deep into the woods, marking trees, mapping directions, screaming for help. But every path led back to the cabin. The forest wasn't looping, it was resetting. The same rock by the stream still bled fresh. The same dead crow still blinked at him. This wasn't nature, this was narrative. He was inside one of those scary woods stories people dismissed as urban legends. A letter that wasn't there before. One morning, a letter appeared on the cabin chair. The handwriting was familiar. Ethan, if you're reading this, I might be free or I'm beyond saving. This cabin is a tear in reality. It keeps what the world forgets, stories no one wants to believe. The national park stories left out of the reports. The true scary stories no ranger would admit. You must burn the photos, all of them. If you see more people appearing, it's already too late. William, the second photo. He found it under the floorboard. This time it wasn't black and white. It was full color, and it showed Ethan sleeping on the cabin floor, the exact position from last night. Behind him, the eyeless boy leaned in, whispering into his ear. Identity meltdown. Ethan began forgetting things. His last name, his birthday, his home. He started hearing William's voice echoing in his thoughts, like a second consciousness. One night he scrawled in his journal, "Am I Ethan?" Or the next version of William, "I only remember the cabin now, the forest, and the smile." Even his reflection began to blur, showing faces not his own, then snapping back as if nothing changed. The final clue, a door that shouldn't be there. The last time he looked at the photo, it was different. The cabin's front door was ajar, and in that crack was a red eye. It wasn't looking into the photo, it was looking out at Ethan, blood that wasn't his. That night, Ethan burned the second photo. It hissed, smoked, and then dripped blood. From the unburned portion of the image, a drop slid down onto the table. That was when he realized it's not about capturing the moment. It's about feeding on the witness, the files they never reported. Behind a false panel in the cabin wall, he discovered a drawer inside hundreds of old ranger reports. Each file was marked missing. No time reference, no confirmed sighting. Dozens of names, all vanished within national parks across decades. Some were tagged as creepy park ranger stories whispered over campfires. One file stood out. Ethan Blackwood, not missing, actively transitioning. The cabin broadcast, the walls turned glossy. Ethan watched scenes from his own past play out on the cabin's walls like looping footage. He saw himself enter the cabin for the first time. He saw his fear, his screams, but then he noticed. The boy was there all along, in every reflection, every shadow, watching, waiting. William wasn't gone, he was changed. That night, Ethan saw the full truth. William wasn't missing. He had become the boy, the one without eyes. The cabin doesn't kill you. It strips your identity, rewrites your story, and uses your image to lure the next one. Ethan was just the latest. A new voice. His voice was no longer his own. It echoed layered with dozens of tones, some pleading, some laughing. Tell the story, Ethan. We need new ears. The last shot. He stepped out of the cabin. For the first time, the woods were gone. In their place, endless gray fog. A voice behind him whispered, "Now it's your turn. Go find someone else." In his hand, a camera, a Reddit post that sparked terror. A month later on Creepy, a post appeared. Found this weird notebook near a trail in Emerson Park, and a photo. It shows a guy with a turtleneck holding a camera, but his eyes are scribbled out. Anyone know this story? Or is it one of those made-up creepy stories? Beneath the post, hundreds of comments appeared. Most laughed, a few asked for the location, but one user simply wrote, "Let's not meet." Memories that were never his. Ethan began dreaming in someone else's memories. He wasn't just watching, he was living them. In those dreams, he was wearing a park ranger uniform. He was patrolling the boundaries of Emerson Forest, noting strange occurrences, fire crawling upward from the soil, a child's laughter echoing from hollow tree trunks, and the most disturbing of all, a boy with no shadow, walking calmly past cabin number 7. He was William, or at least something that had once been William. The cabin wasn't a place, It was a creature. The cabin changed shape. When Ethan was afraid, the walls bled black sap. When he was angry, the ceiling screamed. When he felt despair, shadows walked beneath the floorboards. The notebook whispered, "This cabin was never built." It grew from silence, from denial, from every story the world refused to remember. It is where the scary horror stories that were never told stay alive. A new set of photos appears one morning. The cabin printed out new photos. Yes, printed on glossy paper like a vintage film lab had come to life. Among them, a couple of forest rangers standing in front of the cabin. Neither had a face. A camping group, one girl being choked by an invisible hand. And finally, Ethan staring into the lens, hollow-eyed, with dozens of eyeless figures behind him, all smiling. These weren't memories. These were scripts. The cabin wasn't just remembering, it was casting. The forest wasn't forest anymore. Ethan tried to escape again, but the trees weren't trees. They shifted and merged into endless hallways, flickering with fluorescent lights. The air smelled like static. Footsteps echoed without source. This wasn't nature. It was a dimension stitched together from creepy outdoor stories, tales of people who vanished into thin air, never to be heard from again. Voices surrounded him. Welcome to the archive of abandoned plots. We are the first drafts of true horror stories, never approved for release. A new loop begins. He woke up, back in the cabin, only this time no photo awaited him. Instead, there was a stack of papers, a script. Scary Horror Stories, Episode 1. A boy finds a strange photo in his grandmother's attic. Episode 8. Ethan walks out of the cabin holding a camera, ready to tell someone else's story. Ethan hadn't written it, but the handwriting was his. The final transformation. His heartbeat slowed, his voice deepened, his hair grew overnight. He no longer looked like Ethan. He no longer felt like Ethan, but he remembered everything. He was no longer the protagonist. He was the narrator. A cursed invitation. In the far corner of the room, a chalkboard flickered into existence, glowing, pulsing, the message written on it ready to become part of the creepy story's record. Speak. Be remembered. A camera powered on. A chair appeared. Ethan sat. He began to talk. With every word he spoke, a part of him faded into myth. The final upload. From nowhere, weeks later, an anonymous post surfaced on Stories from Reddit. The message was simple. Received a video from an untraceable address. 27 minutes long. A man talks about a cabin, a photo, a forest that eats memory. I couldn't look away. At the end, I saw myself sitting behind him. The post went viral. Thousands of replies. Disbelief, fear, curiosity. But one comment stood out from a user named Let's Read Archive Bot. It's your turn next. Cabin Logic, the story that rewrites you. If you've ever felt like you've heard this before, if the story sounds too familiar, it's because you have. Cabin number 7 isn't in any official national park stories. There's no record of it in government archives. But if you search hard enough on Reddit, in whispers on forgotten forums, you'll find pieces. Posts flagged as fake, screenshots with blurred faces, discredited park ranger stories, but they all lead back to one thing, a photo that should never have been found, Ethan's final entry. In what may be the last journal page, there is no escape. The cabin doesn't end you, it makes you permanent. It turns you into story, and stories are viral. If you're reading this, and if you're still real, leave the photo where you found it. Don't scan it. Don't post it. Don't remember it. A new beginning. Somewhere another attic creaks. A child finds an old photograph. Dust brushes away. A face stares back familiar, smiling, eyes blacked out. And from somewhere just off frame, a voice whispers, "Tell them about me, the last photograph. They say if you find an old photo that shouldn't exist, you should burn it." But how do you burn something that doesn't belong to this world? Ethan was never found. After the final video upload, no one could confirm what really happened in Cabin of Seven, but those who watched all say the same thing, I feel like. I've heard this story before, from myself. The cabin didn't collapse, it vanished. When park rangers returned to Emerson, they found only a square of scorched earth in the trees. No walls, no furniture, no cabin, just one photo lying in the ashes. In it, a man in a turtleneck, camera in hand, back turned to the lens. And if you zoom in far enough, you'll see someone who looks exactly like you staring back through a reflection. A story that doesn't want to be forgotten. This isn't entertainment anymore. This is one of those scary horror stories that lives inside your mind, fueled by fear, fed by memory. Now that you've read this far, you're part of it. Not a true horror story from Reddit. Not just a scary true story to whisper about. This is the story that writes you back. Final warning. If you ever see a photo you don't remember taking with someone in it who looks like you, walk away. Don't ask questions. Don't become another chapter in these creepy stories, true creepy stories, or creepy outdoor stories that drift between our world and theirs. And if someone asks you to retell it, remember, let's not meet.